Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm so excited to share with you guys my favorite books of 2023. I have a list of 11 books here, and there's a bit of a story behind why it's 11 and not just 10. Originally, there were actually only 8 that I solidly had on my favorites list, and I was like, I really would rather it be 10 because that just feels better. It was a bit of a rough year for reading. I mentioned that in my disappointing reads, and yeah, that definitely impacted my amount of favorites, but I wanted to at least get to like top 10. So I was like, okay, what's 2 others? So I found one that I was like, yeah, I definitely can put that in space 9. But in space 10, I have 2 that I actually feel very similarly about, as far as like, I'm very fond of them. There's maybe something about them that I'm like, okay, maybe it's not like a favorite, but I really enjoyed them. And I could not, like, if I put one on there, it felt weird to not have the other one because I literally have the exact same emotional connection to both. So we went for 11. I'd rather have 11 than 8 or 9. It just sounds better. So we're going to stick with that. I do have them ranked, so we're going to go through these in order from my least favorite to my most. Of course, all of them are ones that I really enjoyed. So let's get started with this, although I will say, of course, these spots in 11 and 10, like I said, I feel very similarly about, so those 2 probably could swap just depending on my mood, but I think this is overall going to be correct. So starting with number 11, I have here Cecily by Annie Garthwaite. This is a book following Cecily Neville, the mother of Richard III and Edward IV, and it mostly follows actually the beginnings of the Wars of the Roses, which I haven't really read very much that follows that point. I usually get to where Edward IV comes into power, all about Richard III, of course, so seeing the lead up from the other perspective, I've seen a little bit from like the Lancastrian point of view, but this is the Yorkist point of view, and so it was really interesting to read. I felt like the approach to Richard, Duke of York was very different in this, which I really enjoyed. I loved the writing style in this. I thought Cecily was a really interesting character. There wasn't really that extra X factor that made me just absolutely love this and think about it a lot afterwards, which is why it's low on the list, but I did really enjoy it. I thought it was a great Wars of the Roses book. It's one of my new favorites. Not that I have read a lot, but I did really like this, and it's probably actually second only to The Sun and Splendor, which is my very favorite Wars of the Roses book, and it's my favorite book, one of my favorite books of all time. So that's pretty high praise. I did really enjoy myself with this one, and also the cover is glorious. Absolutely love it. Next, in the 10th spot, I have Daughters of Sparta by Claire Heywood. This is a story following both Helen of Troy and her sister Clytemnestra through their different experiences, if you know anything about Greek myth. And Claire Heywood is so interesting because she does things differently than a lot of other Greek myth retelling individuals, authors that have come up recently do, where they focus a lot on just making the magic real, like it's all the gods and goddesses are all real and you're having these experiences with them. Claire Heywood places these stories in a reality, a historical reality, and it really adds a whole other layer of depth to the idea of these legends because it makes them feel like real people who actually lived in our world, who experienced these really difficult, hard things. And so I really enjoyed the way she explores that. She also wrote The Shadows of Perseus, which follows 3 women that are involved with Perseus, including Medusa. I did enjoy that one. There were some aspects I didn't love as much. I definitely felt more connected to these characters, but I did like that one as well. And it actually made me feel a little bit more bad for Helen of Troy, which I've never felt before. I've never really liked her. I've always thought she was obnoxious, and I think in this she does come across as dumb and obnoxious a little bit at certain points. But I think with what her story is, it's difficult to not have her be a little bit like that, either super naive or having her betray her family the way she does. And so it makes sense that she's going to have some of those character traits, but I actually really loved the way Claire Heywood made this end with her relationship with certain characters. I liked Clytemnestra in this as well. I think Clytemnestra is one of my favorite stories in Greek myth, and so I really like getting different perspectives on her. And I just love this. I just really enjoyed it. Like I said, similar feelings with Cecily. It doesn't have that X factor that made me like absolutely love it and think about it a lot, but I really enjoyed my experience reading it, and I'm so glad I did. In the 9th spot, we have a classic, the first classic on this list, and that is Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. This is now officially my second favorite cozy children's classic. I really loved this. I have seen the original movies, and I liked seeing all of the little episodic short stories that occur in that film. With what happened in the book and the writing, I listened listened to it on audiobook and really enjoyed that experience. My number one favorite classic in that category is, of course, Little Women, but I did really enjoy this. So glad I read it. And it's just such a sweet and relatable in so many ways character, and it's just fun to just watch her shenanigans. I love her and Gilbert. I think they're so cute, and yeah, I just really loved this experience, and I do intend to continue with this series at some point. Now we're getting into my top 8, which were the original ones I had on this list, starting with Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. This book follows the Booth family, as in John Wilkes Booth, as they grew up and a lot of their experiences with the shifting landscape they were living in. They are a theater family and have a lot of difficulties with relationships and other things, and it just really explores the children other than John Wilkes, I should say. He's very much a side character to everything else, but of course by the end he becomes a very central player to all of their experience because of the nature of the act he commits, and I really loved the writing in this. I really loved the exploration of these people. I am a big true crime consumer, and this book was inspired for Karen Joy Fowler. It was inspired by thinking about the families of the perpetrators within school shootings and other shootings, and just exploring the emotions behind being the family member of someone who would do that when you're not necessarily the type of person who would do that, but you also love this person and know a lot about them, and it surprises you, and then you get all this negative attention from other people where most of the time it probably wasn't your fault. And being a true crime consumer myself, I have thought about that aspect of being the family member of a perpetrator of a horrible violent crime and just how that would impact you, and also the lead up of like seeing possible signs and maybe ignoring them or noticing them and being worried about them but not really knowing what to do about it. Also, this time period is one that I think is very fascinating. I honestly don't have a lot of fascination for American history, but I do for like the early days, American Revolution, and then around the Civil War period. I am interested in a lot to do with that, and I thought that was explored very well. I think this was a really great book, and I'm so glad I was able to get to it this year. Next, I have, unfortunately, the only book from this list that I read in the last 4 or 5 months of the year. I read Booth in July, and basically everything after that was pretty mediocre, unfortunately. But this one I read right at the end of the year, and I did end up really loving it, and that is Sylvias Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. This story follows a young girl who is living in this whaling community. A lot of the young men go out and work on whaling ships, and she is a young, naive girl who has her cousin who works in a shop nearby who is very much into her, and she's not into him. And then she ends up meeting this heroic young man in the town who they begin to have a relationship with each other. That's all I'm going to say. There's a lot more drama that comes out of that, but it was a really wonderful book. My only thing that I didn't like about it was the ending. I did not like how it came together. There's also one of the characters, the cousin that's interested in her, that I had some issue with, but on the whole I enjoyed my experience reading this so much that I had to put it on this list, and it had to be higher than the ones I've already talked about because I think I'm going to think about this book a lot. I really loved the atmosphere. Like, the process of reading it was really just incredible. So I definitely am so glad I finally got to this, and it is my last Elizabeth Gaskell full-length novel that I needed to read, so a ranking will be coming soon. But for now, it definitely was on my favorites of 2023, and I'm so glad I got to it. Next, we have a nonfiction on this list, and that is How to Be a Victorian, A Dawn to Dusk Guide to Victorian Life by Ruth Goodman. This is exactly what it sounds like. Basically, Ruth Goodman explores from morning to night what Victorian people of different classes would do, how they would get up in the morning, how they would take care of themselves, how they would work, how they would spend their leisure time, especially towards the end of the Victorian period when that became more of a thing, what they would wear, all of that jazz. And I really found it very fascinating. It's definitely one I've thought about a lot since. There were moments while reading it where it was maybe not the most interesting, just certain topics that I just didn't care about as much, but the information was so fascinating, and like I said, I've thought about it regularly since. Like, there's just things that come up obviously in my day-to-day life that I think about, oh, this is how they did it in the Victorian period. That's so cool. So I really loved this. I do have the audiobook for How to Be a Tutor by Ruth Goodman that I really want to get to, especially after reading this and enjoying it so much. So definitely lived up to my expectations. A lot of people have said great things about this, and now I can join those ranks and say that it really is a wonderful book, especially if you're interested in this time period. Next, I have my second Greek myth retelling, and that is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, one of the quintessential, I would say, Greek myth retellings of the modern day, and I really ended up enjoying it. I really wasn't sure going into it because I knew it kind of broke up and spread the stories amongst all of the women involved in the Trojan War, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like jumping between different characters that much, but I ended up really enjoying the way Natalie Haynes wrote. I felt like Natalie Haynes wrote in a way that even though you had very short moments with each of the characters, you felt a relationship with them despite not actually getting much time with them, which I found really impressive. I loved the exploration of the Greek world and the mythology behind it, and I just thought it was a really well-crafted book, and one I'll definitely return to in the future. I absolutely adored it, and the cover is still one of my favorite Greek myth retelling covers ever. Every time I would see this in bookstores, I was like, I need to get that just for the cover, and finally read it, and really enjoyed myself with it. I should have mentioned with 1,000 Ships, we were getting into my top 5, so now number 4 on my list is my other nonfiction, actually, and that is Romantic Outlaws by Charlotte Gordon, The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a biography of both Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Shelley, mother and daughter, and I loved it so much. I've heard great things all over BookTube about this book, particularly from Jennifer Brooks, and I have to say I very much agree with them. I really loved getting to know these two women through this book, and I felt like the author met a great balance with it. It was entertaining to listen to. Their lives were so dramatic and over the top, and yet also just so real, and I loved that about them. I know Jennifer Brooks has said that this made her fall in love with particularly Mary Shelley. I think this one made me fall a little bit more in love with Mary Wollstonecraft, but I did really enjoy the chapters about Mary Shelley as well, and it was definitely a very big highlight of my year, so glad that I was able to read this. Next we have actually a reread, but it's been so long since I read this, and I read it for school, and so it just felt in some ways like it was the first time I read it because I haven't really experienced it as just like a personal read before, and so it was just a brand new experience for me. It's been so long, like I think it's been over 10 years since I read this book, so it was new enough. I felt like I could put it on this list, and that is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I listened to the audiobook for this as I was traveling to Boston and the surrounding areas, including Salem, and that definitely added to the experience of listening to this. In fact, I'm pretty sure I finished this while in Salem. No, maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't, actually. I thought I did, but now I'm like rethinking. But I did listen to a big chunk in Salem. So that was just really fun and interesting experience. But also the language of this book. I knew I really liked Nathaniel Hawthorne's writing. I read The House of the Seven Gables a few years ago, and while I didn't love that book plot-wise, the writing, I remember distinctly being like, the writing was amazing. Like, I really enjoyed the experience of reading that book, even if I didn't love the plot. And this one had that beautiful writing and a plot that I liked a lot better. So I am so glad I decided to revisit this. Hester Prynne is such a fascinating character, and I just love all of the other experiences going on in this book. I love her daughter and what she ends up doing and becoming, the kind of person she is. I don't know. There's a lot of fantastical elements to this story that just kind of get slid in there that I really love, and like I said, the writing is just glorious. So yes, so glad I revisited this, and I would say it's probably now one of my favorite classics of all time. I don't know if I'd necessarily put it in top 10, maybe, but it definitely is high on my list for sure. Next, I have a series because I did not want to have a quarter of this list taken up just by these books. It's a trilogy, but I did love all of them, and particularly the first and second. It would have been really hard for me to decide. I keep going back and forth on which one is my favorite, so I'm like, you know what? We're just putting the whole series on this list, and that is the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I read this at the beginning of this year and absolutely adored it. I did vlog my whole experience. If you wanted to see that, I will try to remember to link my playlist down below. I do intend to continue with Robin Hobb this year. I do have books for the Life Ship Traders, but for now. For this year, I only got to these 3. I love Robin Hobb's writing. It was so glorious and just pulled me right into the story. It is a very slow burn type of storytelling, which is not going to work for everyone. I personally love an epic fantasy with a slow burn, so I was just content to read this and be in this world. My favorite character, if you watch my vlogs, you know, is Verity, and I'm still upset by things that come together for him, but it's fine. It's fine. If it was going to be that way, I'm glad Robin Hobb did it the way she did it, just to keep it as vague as possible. But yes, I loved these books. I had a lot of irritation with Fitz as a character, but not in any way that ruined my experience of the book. In fact, it probably aided it because it made me think a lot more about how I feel about the book and about how I feel about the characters and their relationships and stuff. And so I think it actually just, even though I was irritated, like, it added to my experience of reading, which may seem strange, but I'm me and I do like a good thought on human psychology, which I think this prompted in me. So anyway, I really, really loved this trilogy, and I'm so excited to continue with The Realm of the Elderlings in the new year. And the number 1 book on this list, I actually ranked lower than some of the other books on this list, but only because there were certain things that I didn't particularly like love in this book, and so when I rated it, I was like, well, I can point out these like issues with it. But looking back on my year and what stood out to me and all of the feelings I've had, I just feel like this is both the one that I felt like was a great work of literature. Like, I felt like it was well written, I understand why it's a classic, and it also has my heart, and I really loved the experience of reading this and thinking about it later. So it just has more of the whole package, and that is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I read this towards the very beginning of the year and absolutely love this. This has been on my priority classics TBR for so long, so clearly it wasn't that big of a priority, that I'm honestly amazed that I actually got to it and that I loved it as much as I did. The characters in this are just wonderful. Dickens's writing in this is just top notch. I love his descriptions and thoughts on the French Revolution. I thought they were very nuanced and interesting. There are several characters I love in this, including the villain. I really think she is wonderfully done, and it's just such a good book. And it's not very long. It's one of Dickens' shorter ones, and I just think it's incredible. I mentioned, so I did a like movie adaptations list for classics earlier this year, and one of them was A Tale of Two Cities. I just think this would make an incredible major motion picture, like a big deal kind of like blockbuster style movie adaptation, and I'm honestly surprised they haven't done it because it's not like it's a less popular one. In fact, it's probably one of the more popular ones. Hopefully one day they'll do it, but for now I am content to just enjoy this book and think it's wonderful. So that is it. Those are the books that I felt like were my favorite of 2023. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, your thoughts on them, as I would love to know. Also, what were your top 3 favorite books of 2023? I would love to know that as well. Maybe it would give me some recommendations that I can look forward to, and maybe I already have them on my list and that will help me prioritize them. So I'm so grateful for the amount of interactions I've been getting this year. It's been incredible. I did hit over 1,000 subscribers, which is so incredible and such an exciting milestone for me, and I'm so grateful to all of you for that. I've also seen a huge increase in comments, which have meant so much to me and just helped me feel a little more connected to the community, which just means a lot, especially through the past few months where I've had a lot of things kind of getting in the way of me feeling really connected to anything. So I really appreciate those interactions and recommendations on all of that. Hopefully I can start implementing a lot of the recommendations and thoughts that have been shared about certain books that I've mentioned that I want to read into my channel this year, and we can discuss those books that you've said that you ended up really liking that have been on some of my TBRs and things. So all that being said, I hope you have a wonderful reading year and had one in 2023. Thank you again for all you do, and I will see you next time. Bye!